Brady Sutherland's fingers dug into Lena Ortiz's throat, hard enough to lift her heels off the polished concrete, and the breath she tried to drag in stopped halfway, like a door slammed shut from the other side. Her clipboard hit the floor first, then her badge, then the side of her shoulder clipped a kennel latch with a sharp metal report that echoed down the transfer corridor. The fluorescent tubes overhead turned every face pale and flat, and her own vision narrowed to Brady's wristwatch pressing against her collarbone, silver case, engraved initials, the kind of thing people gave sons who had never been denied anything in their lives. "Say it," Brady hissed, his face inches from hers. "Say the transfer clears." Lena's hands found his wrist and tried to peel him off, but the angle was wrong and her oxygen was already thinning. Her lips shaped words that barely existed. Order. Invalid. He tightened. Her airway shrank to a pinhole. Then he kicked Atlas. The toe of Brady's designer boot drove into the German shepherd's rib line with a hollow crack that bounced off steel kennels, chain-link partitions, and concrete block walls, a sound too big for one strike. Atlas skidded sideways on the sealed floor, claws scraping, shoulders twisting, tan and black saddleback coat, dark as iron under fluorescent light. 41 people stood in that 3 a.m. transfer corridor, and not one of them stepped in. 2 contractors near the intake scanner froze with bitter packets in their hands, eyes fixed on the forms like paper could save them. A lieutenant from logistics took one step back until his shoulders touched a caged run, and stayed there, jaw tight, silent. A civilian veterinarian in a gray cardigan pressed her knuckles to her mouth and stared at nothing. The procurement captain at the center console looked down at his clipboard and began reading lot numbers he had already read twice, lips moving without sound, performing procedure while a woman was being strangled 3 feet away. Nobody moved. Lena heard her own pulse in both ears, thick and irregular. She had treated blast injuries in Helmand, with one glove on and one hand inside a chest cavity. She had held pressure on a femoral bleed for 11 minutes while rotor wash threw sand in her eyes. None of that training changed the simple animal terror of being unable to pull air into her lungs. Brady's breath smelled like mint and coffee. "You work intake," he said. "You stamp what's in front of you." She tasted copper where her teeth caught the inside of her cheek. "Codes forged," she whispered, each syllable torn. "Disposition code is forged." He laughed once, short and contemptuous. "My father funds this annex. My father owns the hospital wing that keeps base command alive. You think your stamp matters?" At the edge of her vision, Atlas rose. Not fast, not wild, controlled. His ears rotated forward first. His body went rigid from the shoulders to tail. A low growl started in his chest and kept building, steady as distant thunder finding range. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He fixed on Brady's center line and waited for a command that had not yet come. The leash in Frank Anderson's hand tightened 1 inch. Frank had entered the corridor less than 30 seconds earlier. NWU Type 3. Camouflage absorbing the harsh green light, 6 feet of stillness and old discipline, duffel still slung over one shoulder from a 900-mile drive that had ended in this fluorescent hallway. A scar cut through the line of his jaw on the left side, pale against beard shadow. From where she hung in Brady's grip, Lena saw his gaze sweep once across her throat. Brady's stance, Atlas's line, the exits, and the camera dome above the central run. He had not spoken yet. Brady either hadn't seen him or had dismissed him as just another uniform. Lena had watched men like Brady make that mistake before. Lena's vision flickered at the edges. Her boots scraped uselessly for traction. She got one thumb under Brady's wrist and pushed, trying to open a sliver of space. "Transfer. Order. Invalid, she rasped again because procedure was still the only weapon she had. Brady's face hardened. You don't decide what leaves this building. His hand shifted. Pressure climbed. A bidder in a camel overcoat took out his phone, lifted it chest high, and began recording, angling for a clear shot instead of stepping forward. A master sergeant near Kennel 6 turned his whole body toward a bulletin board covered in outdated feeding schedules and pretended to study dates from 2 months earlier. The veterinarian kept her hand over her mouth. The procurement captain turned a page on his clipboard with 2 fingers that were now visibly shaking. The corridor smelled like disinfectant, wet fur, and overheated wiring. Somewhere behind the sealed door to the East Bay, a retired Malinois barked once and then went silent. At 3:07 a.m., it felt to Lena like the whole annex was waiting for someone else to be brave. Lena felt her knees buckle. Brady hauled her back upright by her throat like she was a strap bag and not a person. Pain shot from her larynx to her ears. The old clavicle fracture she carried from Hellman lit up like a fault line when her shoulder slammed into him. "Look at me," he said. "Say transfer approved." She couldn't. Atlas shifted one paw forward. His nails clicked once on concrete. Frank's hand settled over the thick fur behind Atlas's neck, not restraining, just anchoring, that silent communication handlers used when words were too slow. Brady finally glanced toward the movement. His eyes traveled from Atlas to the camo uniform to Frank's face and stayed there half a second too long. He smiled anyway. Privilege had taught him to smile at risk. "You're late, Chief," he said, mistaking rank and reality in one sentence. "Dog's already reassigned." Frank said nothing. Lena watched Brady's thumb press harder into the side of her throat and understood with clinical clarity that if this went another 10 seconds, she could black out standing up. She also understood with equal clarity that no one in the room intended to put a hand on Brady Sutherland while cameras were rolling and his family name was etched into half the town. Bidders, officers, contractors, rows of eyes, still hands, clipped badges catching fluorescent glare. No one moved. The procurement captain finally looked up. For one raw second, Lena thought he might intervene. His gaze met hers, saw exactly what was happening, then slid past her shoulder to Frank like he was searching for a chain of command that would absolve him from acting. He found silence and chose it. Brady leaned closer until his forehead almost touched Lena's. "You think anyone here is choosing you?" Her hearing tunneled. The edges of the room grayed. She heard Atlas's growl deepen and felt it in her sternum, a vibration as old as warning. Frank took one step forward, boots quiet, posture unchanged. Brady drew his phone from his jacket pocket without releasing Lena and raised it toward Frank and Atlas, camera lens glinting under fluorescent glare. "Say something," he said. "Go ahead. Make this public." Frank's gaze did not move from Brady's hands. Lena's left hand slipped from Brady's wrist. Her fingers had gone numb. She could no longer feel the ridges of his watch band cutting into her skin. Her medic brain kept counting backward from 10 the way she had trained patients to do through panic. She reached 6 and lost the sequence. Atlas's ears pinned tighter. His body locked. The growl became a rolling sound that made even the contractors by the scanner step back. Then Atlas moved. Before contact, before the corridor exploded into motion, hold this moment with us and tell us where you're watching from tonight, because these stories travel farther than the people who try to bury them. Subscribe if you still believe veterans and service dogs should never be sold to power or erased by paperwork. Stay to the end because what happened in this corridor dismantled a family name bolted to half the town. Then Atlas moved. He did not leap for the throat, And that was the first detail that separated training from panic. He drove forward in a low, controlled line. Shoulder first, 85 pounds of tan, and black force angled like a breaching ram into the space between Lena's collapsing frame and Brady's planted stance. The impact made a hard, drum-like sound against designer denim and bone, and Brady's grip shifted by instinct, not choice, just enough. 2 fingers loosened. 1 thumb slipped off the side of Lena's trachea. Air tore into her lungs in a ragged half-breath that burned all the way down. Nobody in the corridor could pretend they had not seen it now. A contractor near the scanner dropped his bitter packet, and the pages spread across concrete like white birds with broken wings. The lieutenant who had backed into the caged run flinched so hard his shoulder hit chain link and rattled it for 3 full seconds. The veterinarian's hand came down from her mouth, and she whispered, "Oh, God," to no one in particular. 41 witnesses, fluorescent light, steel kennels, a woman still choking, a war dog now locked between her and the man hurting her. Brady staggered 1 step and caught himself, phone still raised, rage replacing surprise so fast it looked rehearsed. "Control your dog," he snapped, voice cracking at the edges. He yanked Lena higher to recover leverage, but Atlas had already reset, ears pinned forward, spine straight, weight over forelegs. The growl rose again, deeper, no bark, just a steady warning that vibrated in the concrete and in every body standing still in that corridor. Frank's left hand stayed on the leash, his right hand lifted from his side by inches and stopped, open, calm, precise. Lena got another breath, then a cough that folded her at the waist even while Brady held her up. Her airway felt sanded raw. Her medic brain snapped back online in jagged pieces. Secure oxygen, protect cervical line, assess threat, document everything. She forced her eyes to the intake desk and saw it through tunnel vision. The terminal still live, transfer queue still open, Atlas's profile box still flashing amber over a disposition code she knew was forged. She made herself focus long enough to drag 1 whisper into the air. "Invalid code," she said. "He's flagged." Brady turned his head toward her voice and bared his teeth in something that wasn't a smile. "You're done talking." He jerked his wrist to crush the words out of her again, but Atlas surged a second time, not touching skin, only closing distance, until his muzzle hovered inches from Brady's forearm. A sound rolled out of the dog's chest like far thunder over winter ground. The man with the phone in the camel overcoat lowered it without meaning to. The procurement captain finally stopped pretending to read lot numbers and stared, clipboard hanging at his side. Frank took 1 more step. Quiet boots. No wasted motion. The corridor seemed to contract around him the way rooms do when one person enters, with the kind of calm that has survived gunfire. NWU Type 3 greens and browns under bad lighting. Duffel strap still crossing his chest from a 900-mile drive, jaw scar pale and sharp. He looked at Lena's throat once, then Brady's elbow angle, then Atlas's line, then the camera dome. His gaze returned to Brady's hand and did not leave. "Back him off," Brady said, louder now, voice pitched for witnesses and recordings. "You hear me? Back him off." Frank still did not speak. That silence hit harder than shouting. Brady heard it too. You could see the moment in his face when inherited confidence met a type of stillness it had never been trained to read. He straightened, trying to reclaim the room with posture. Phone lifted higher, lens pointed at Frank, then Atlas, then Lena gasping against his knuckles. "This is my transfer corridor," he said. "You don't get a vote." Lena's knees dipped again. Atlas shifted to mirror her movement, body angled to catch if she dropped. Frank's hand tightened 1 inch on the leash. not restraining aggression, calibrating distance like a man setting charges by feel. Behind them, Kennel 6 started barking, and Kennel 7 answered, then Kennel 9, the whole annex waking in a chain reaction of sound. The steel corridor that had swallowed everyone's courage for 7 minutes finally sounded like a place that remembered what these dogs were trained to do when a threat closed on a human body. And right there, at the edge of contact, the story held. If you're listening from a town where people in power still think service can be bought and loyalty can be reassigned with a forged code, mark your city and stand in this moment with us. If you believe veterans and MWDs deserve more than donor politics and midnight paperwork, stay with this all the way through. What happened next did not stop at one chokehold in one corridor. It reached donor walls, command desks, police foundations, and every locked drawer where complaints had gone to die. Because this pause mattered. The easiest version of this story was the one the room wanted. Call it a misunderstanding. Call it a heated exchange. Tell intake to correct the code, push the transfer before dawn, and never speak of it again. The procurement captain could have filed a discrepancy report and buried it under routine inventory updates. The lieutenant could have written that no visible force was used. The bidder with the camel overcoat could have edited his recording to begin after Lena got her breath back. 41 witnesses could have left with clean shoes and dirty silence. That was the local method. Polished floors, sealed records, perfect deniability. You've seen that method before, even if the names were different. It starts with a family that funds enough institutions to make gratitude look like fear. It expands through men who call their own cowardice procedure. It survives because the vulnerable are always busy surviving, and the people with leverage are always busy protecting each other. In Ridgemont, the Sutherland name sat on a trauma tower, a courthouse donor wall, a police charity gala banner, and an annex contract no one was supposed to question at 3 a.m. Every plaque carried a message: this town has owners. Most people learned to read it young. Lena had read it and pushed back anyway. She was 29, former Army medic, night shift intake supervisor, with a healed clavicle that still ached in cold weather and a nephew asleep above a freight route because rent had eaten every safer option. Her job was signatures, chips, chain of custody, codes that looked boring until one of them was wrong. That night, she saw a reassignment order with mismatched authorizations and a disposition code that did not exist in the active matrix. She flagged it, she rechecked it, she refused to clear it. She knew what vanished records looked like because she had held too many things together in combat to trust convenient mistakes at home. Brady had read her refusal as a temporary obstacle. He was 27, jacket stitched in Milan, $400 sunglasses hanging at his collar at 3 a.m., the casual costume of a man who had never stood in a line he couldn't skip. He had grown up watching calls from his father convert violations into clerical errors, seeing deputies defer, seeing administrators smile through clenched teeth and say they'd handle it internally. By the time he was old enough to start his executive security program, he already understood the unwritten rule: systems bend for bloodlines. He thought retired service dogs were inventory. He thought handlers were paperwork. He thought dawn would come, transfer would close, and Atlas would disappear into private custody behind a legal-looking file. Frank had read the same room and recognized the deeper map. Retired Navy SEAL. Yemen scar along the jaw. Sleep broken into 90-minute blocks since Chief Daniel Voss died in a medevac corridor that should have held. Hypervigilance worn like skin. NWU Type 3. Not for show, for structure. 6 months fighting an adoption chain that kept misplacing his handler preference for Atlas until he stopped asking and started documenting. When a frightened clerk left a voicemail saying they refused to return the Combat K-9 and transfer would finalize before dawn, Frank drove 900 miles through the night with Atlas in the back and Old Grief in the passenger seat, arriving with exactly enough time to catch a hand around a throat. Atlas had read Danger first because he always did. 8 years old. German Shepherd, 5 deployments, 23 documented lives saved across Afghanistan and Yemen. Shrapnel fragment through the left hip in Kandahar during an IED search lane. Winter limp on bad mornings, no reduction in judgment. Tan and black saddleback coat that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow. Decorated, demobilized, nearly stolen by signatures and timing. In that corridor, with Lena's airway closing and Frank still measuring angles, Atlas did what combat dogs do when seconds decide outcomes. He marked the threat, claimed the space, and refused to yield it. So before we continue, hold on to the bystander count and hold on to the sound in that hallway. 41 people watched. Steel kennels carried the growl. A woman fought for breath while a town's power structure stood in a line and looked away. Remember that when names start dropping and excuses start forming, because both were seconds away. Now let's go back to the beginning. To the hour before anyone in that corridor heard Atlas growl. Lena Ortiz finished her shift at 6:12 a.m., climbed 3 flights to apartment 3C, and paused in the hallway until the freight train passed. The walls shook first, then the glass in the stairwell, then the metal numbers on the doors gave their thin, rattling chorus. She unlocked quietly anyway. Mateo was still asleep on the fold-out couch with his noise-canceling headphones, crooked over one ear, one sock half off, school worksheet spread across his chest in penciled block letters. Name 3 things that make you feel safe. He had written, in careful pressure marks, that almost tore the paper, Tia Lena, blanket, dog videos. She stood there longer than she meant to. At 29, Lena carried her life in stacked routines because routines did not break when people did. Coffee first, then Mateo's lunch, then ice pack over the old clavicle line if the weather had turned cold overnight. Hellman had been 8 years earlier, but the fracture still announced itself when storms came through Ridgemont, or when she lifted anything above shoulder height. She had learned the shape of pain the way she had learned medication dosages. By repetition, by attention, by refusing denial. The apartment smelled like detergent, pencil shavings, and the diesel breath of trucks grinding through the intersection below. Mateo stirred when she set a plate on the coffee table, blinking into daylight like someone surfacing. He was 8 and serious in the morning, all questions and careful observation. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "That means no. That means enough." He accepted the lie because children with grief in their history learned to accept certain lies if breakfast was warm, and the person saying them stayed in the room. Lena watched him eat, braid his shoelaces wrong, then fix them without asking for help. By the 2nd week of October, he had stopped asking whether his mother was coming back, and started asking whether Lena's night shifts were forever. "Just for now," she told him each time. She walked him to the bus stop at 7:04 with a thermos in one hand and his science project board in the other. 2 blocks over, Ridgemont Trauma Tower caught morning light on its mirrored face, and Sutherland glinted across the entrance in brushed steel letters 3 feet high. Mateo followed her gaze. "Is that the hospital from your stories?" he asked. "It's a hospital," she said. He squinted up at the name like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Adults kept insisting was simple. Lena reached the annex before sunset for another overnight block, intake station humming under fluorescent light, printer warm, scanner calibrated. Ridgemont Military Working Dog Disposition. Annex sounded humane on paper. In practice, it was a corridor network that smelled like disinfectant and stress, where retired MWDs were evaluated, transferred, adopted, or warehoused until budget language found a category for them. Lena had taken the intake supervisor role because records mattered and because she trusted systems only when she could watch them with her own eyes. At 9:38 p.m., she opened Atlas's file for routine pre-transfer verification and felt her spine tighten. The name was right. Microchip serial was right. Deployment summary was right. But the disposition code in Field 17B did not map to any current transfer lane. It looked real from a distance. Same alphanumeric structure, same spacing, same authorization column. Up close, it was a ghost code, a string that had existed in a decommissioned matrix 2 years earlier. The sign-off line carried 2 signatures that matched prior authorizations in style, but not in stroke pressure. She zoomed in and saw it. One name had a tremor pattern from copy and paste compression, not pen. Lena checked again, then again. "Need that queue clear by midnight," Procurement Captain Ellis Pike said, walking past her station, with his clipboard tucked to his chest. "Lot 14 is wrong," she said without looking up. "Wrong how?" "Invalid disposition code, signature mismatch." Pike's jaw set in a way she had come to recognize. Not confusion, calculation. "Cross-check with the supplemental sheet." "I did." "Then use discretion." She turned in her chair and met his eyes. "Discretion is for non-critical fields. This isn't one." His gaze flicked to the file name and away. "Your intake, Ortiz. Intake logs what command approves." She held the silence long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Flag it if you need to feel better," he said. "Then process." He kept walking. Nobody in that annex wore villainy on their face. That was the point. Most of the enabling came in polished language, in professional tone, in reminders about lane discipline and chain of command. Lena reopened the code index binder and verified what she already knew. Atlas's transfer order had been engineered to pass at speed at night when fewer people were watching. At 10:21 p.m., she created a discrepancy note, attached time-stamped screenshots, and saved mirrored copies to the secure incident folder and an encrypted drive she carried on her keyring. In Hellman, she had learned one rule that survived every theater. If the record can be altered, create 2 records. If it can be deleted, create 3. Near midnight, Dr. Mira Keene from Veterinary Review stopped by intake to sign med clearance updates. She was in her 60s, gray cardigan over scrubs, reading glasses low on her nose, hands steady from decades of precise works. "You look like you swallowed a staple," Keene said. "Field 17B, Lena replied, turning the monitor so she could see. Keene read for 10 seconds and went very still. "Who authorized this?" "That's the question." Keene glanced over her shoulder toward the central corridor. "You escalated?" "To Pike." "And?" He said process. Keene rubbed her thumb along the edge of the desk, thinking. "Get me a printed copy, marked." Lena printed 2. Keene folded one into her file jacket and slid the other back across the desk. "Whatever this is, it's not clerical," she said. "Don't be alone when this gets challenged." Lena almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because night shift was almost entirely a study in being alone while surrounded by people. She tucked the copy under her keyboard and kept moving through intake tasks as if routine had not just split. 3 days passed before the first direct pressure arrived. The call came at 1:16 a.m. from an internal number that displayed only admin line B. Male voice, young, controlled confidence sharpened by boredom. This is Brady Sutherland. I'm confirming transfer clearance for Atlas. Lot 14. Pending discrepancy review, Lena said. Clear it. Not until authorization validates. A pause, then a laugh that carried no humor at all. You're confused about how this works. No, she said. I'm not. He hung up. By the following Monday, the friction had spread sideways through the annex. A deputy assigned to overnight perimeter began lingering near intake, not threatening, just present in the way a warning can be present. Two clerks stopped making eye contact with Lena in the break room. Pike sent her 3 emails in one shift asking for status normalization on Lot 14. She answered each with the same sentence. Awaiting signature verification through proper channel. The problem with proper channels in Ridgemont was that they circled upward into the same few hands. Brady Sutherland did not build his power. He inherited it and polished it. At 27, he had the relaxed posture of men who had never had to test whether a boundary would hold. Designer jacket in weather that required no jacket. $400 sunglasses hanging from his collar at 3 a.m. like a costume detail. He moved through institutions as if they were extensions of his family hallway. At the annual Police Foundation Gala, his surname appeared on the donor tier, one banner beside his father's. At the courthouse, Sutherland, etched into bronze, listed endowment partners in letters tall enough for photographs. At Ridgemont Trauma Tower, Charles Sutherland's portrait hung outside the boardroom with a plaque that read, Service Through Stewardship. Stewardship was one word for it, another was leverage. Brady's program had a clean public name, Sutherland Executive Security Training Initiative. Brochures showed retired MWDs trotting beside suited handlers near corporate campuses, all discipline and prestige. Investors were told it was veteran-adjacent, civic-minded, high-standard protection. What never appeared in the brochures was the acquisition pattern, rushed transfers, altered codes, handlers not notified, appeals delayed until the animal was already reclassified under private contract language. When lower staff objected, a call arrived. When officers hesitated, a reminder landed about sponsorship funds and pending promotions. When someone filed a complaint, it entered a queue that never seemed to reach daylight. Brady had learned to narrate this as efficiency. Government wastes assets, he told a room of private clients one Thursday afternoon at the Ridge Club conference hall. Panoramic windows facing the golf course his father partly owned. We preserve value. We provide outcomes. A man in a navy blazer asked, Handlers ever push back? Brady smiled. Handlers don't control disposition. He said it like weather, neutral, uncontestable. In private, his language was simpler. My father owns this town, he told his friend Evan Crane outside Trauma Tower one night. Both of them leaning against a black Porsche SUV while valets pretended not to hear. People think policy matters. It's names that matter. Crane laughed and tapped ash into a planter. You still stuck on that annex, dog? Temporary delay, Brady said. Intake clerk with a hero complex. Fire her. Too noisy. We'll correct it cleaner. He meant paperwork. He always meant paperwork first, pressure second, spectacle last. By late October, Lena had assembled a private folder she kept off-site in a fireproof box under winter blankets in her hall closet. Discrepancy printouts, date-stamped screenshots, email threads, call logs, one scanned memo showing a transfer code template altered outside approved revision history. She added each document after shift while Mateo did homework at the kitchen table. "What's that box for?" he asked one evening. "Important papers." "Like taxes?" "Like proof." He considered that, then nodded as if proof were another household item, alongside dish soap and bandages. At the annex, Brady began appearing in person. First at 11:40 p.m. on a Friday, walking the corridor with two contractors in matching black jackets, speaking loudly about capacity optimization and private sector agility, while kennel staff kept their eyes on clipboards. Then at 2:05 a.m., the next Tuesday, alone, tapping his phone against his palm as he stopped at intake. "Still pending?" he asked. "Still invalid," Lena said. He leaned in, close enough that she caught mint and espresso on his breath. "You think this file protects you? I think records matter. Records belong to the institution." She held his gaze. "Not after export." His expression changed for a fraction of a second, irritation giving way to curiosity, as if he had just discovered she was not scared in the way he preferred. "Who trained you?" "Army medicine." "That explains the attitude." He walked away, smiling, but not with ease. The next night, Pike reassigned Lena from a primary intake to overflow kennel reconciliation, a clerical demotion in all but name. She appealed in writing and copied base operations compliance. No response. She returned to intake anyway when the overnight clerk called out sick. Procedure gave her cover if she moved fast enough. At 12:48 a.m., a junior records clerk named Nora slipped a folded note across Lena's desk while pretending to ask for toner. "They're pushing a lot 14 before dawn Thursday. Private buyers list closed. Don't trust Pike." Lena looked up. Nora did not meet her eyes. "I never gave you this," she whispered. "You didn't," Lena said. Nora walked away too quickly and dropped a stack of labels on purpose so she could kneel and hide her face while she picked them up. By then, Brady's confidence had hardened into certainty. He had his father's board connections, the deputy who stalled calls, the captain who called coercion workflow, and a corridor full of professionals trained to avoid career-ending courage. He believed no one would challenge the transfer once the clock crossed 3 in the morning. He was wrong about one variable he did not know existed yet: a handler 900 miles away whose number Nora had copied from an archived contact field before someone scrubbed it from active view. At 1:03 a.m. on transfer night, while Lena reran Atlas's microchip scan and watched the red discrepancy banner flash for the 4th time, Nora stood in the records closet with the door closed, dialed with shaking fingers, and left a voicemail that would travel farther than anyone in Ridgemont expected. "They refused to return him," she whispered into the phone. "They're finalizing before dawn. If you're coming, come now." Nora ended the call with her forehead against the records closet door, listening to her own breathing and the hum of old fluorescent ballast, while 900 miles of interstate had already rolled under Frank Anderson's tires, and his phone lit in the dash cradle of a truck he hadn't stopped driving. He was already awake. Sleep came to him in 90-minute fragments, never more, never clean, and when the alarm on his wrist had pulsed before he left Norfolk, he had done what he always did: checked the front lock, checked the back lock, checked the hallway through the peephole, then made coffee strong enough to taste like metal. His apartment looked occupied only by function: folded uniforms, field manuals stacked by size, a duffel packed 3/4 full because he never quite unpacked anymore. On the wall above the table, one framed photo of his old element in Yemen, 6 men squinting into white heat, one German shepherd between them, and Chief Daniel Voss on the left with his hand on Frank's shoulder, like he was pinning him to the world. The voicemail notification showed no saved name. He let the truck run straight for another mile, took the next exit, and pulled under a closed farm supply awning to listen in the dark. Frank played it once, then again. They refused to return him. They're finalizing before dawn. If you're coming, come now. Nor's whisper shook on the word coming, fear in clean audio. No background noise except a vent fan and distant kennel barking. Real call, real urgency. Frank called back and got records dispatched, then dead air, then a mailbox that said full. He called the annex duty line and reached a contractor who answered with scripted politeness and ended with, "Lot transfers are internal business, sir." He hung up before his temper could waste seconds. The odometer log on his dash showed the grind he had already put down since leaving. Fuel, rain, tolls, 2 state lines, no real brakes. He reached for the dry bag on the passenger seat and pulled his adoption binder onto his lap. He opened to the first page because ritual kept his thinking straight. Handler preference form, filed 6 months earlier, received stamp visible, processing stamp missing. Then denial notice, no valid handler claim on record. Then appeal packet. Then legal aid correspondence. Then 3 separate agency replies that each used different language to say the same thing. Disposition pending. On the right side of the binder sat printed screenshots of status changes made at times no clerk would work unless someone wanted no witnesses. He had marked them in red, date, hour, user, ID. Every page had cost him something. PTO days, legal fees. Sleep he did not have to spare. He slid the binder back into the dry bag with 2 USB drives and a sealed envelope he had stopped opening after the 3rd time. Voss's handwriting on the front in thick black marker, "If I don't make it back." Frank merged back onto the highway and moved. Navigation still pointed at Ridgemont Military Working Dog Disposition Annex, the route line long and blunt across the map, but he had stopped watching ETAs hours ago. He drove west in disciplined increments, coffee, fuel, stretch, return, never letting his focus slip into memory for long because memory could take the wheel if you gave it room. But this night, memory came anyway. It came at mile 78, when he passed a Medevac billboard and saw rotor wash in his head instead of rain. It came at mile 142 when he flexed his left hand and felt scar tissue pull across old cuts from breaching wire in Yemen. It came at mile 219 when he heard Voss laughing in that clipped way he had right before they moved to target. The failed Medevac corridor had started with radio confidence and ended with a tarp. Frank had replayed it enough to know each second by shape. Compound breach successful. 2 hostiles down. Civilian extraction complete. Then secondary fire from an alley they had cleared, and 1 round into Voss high in the chest, just under armor edge when he turned to shield a translator. Frank had dragged him to cover and worked compression with both hands, while their corpsmen called bird after bird that never landed, because weather and threat matrix and command language that sounded clean in reports. Voss stayed conscious for 4 minutes, eyes clear, breathing wet. "Dog goes with you," he had said once, voice thin but steady. "Not with admin. You hear me?" Frank said yes, because there was nothing else to say. Voss died before dawn. The report called it unavoidable. Frank called it a debt that never stopped accruing. A little after 1:20 a.m., he pulled into a truck stop outside Knoxville and stood at Pump 6 in cold air that smelled like diesel and fryer oil. A family in a minivan argued softly near the bathrooms. A teenage cashier watched a game show with the volume off. Frank scanned doors, corners, reflective surfaces, then caught his own posture. in the dark window and recognized the same rigid frame Lena would later clock in the corridor. Broad shoulders from work, not vanity, a man who moved like every room might still be hostile. Inside, he bought black coffee and a protein bar he didn't open. At a corner table, he took out the binder and called Senior Chief Reardon, the veteran liaison who had helped him push past the first denial wall. Reardon answered on the second ring, voice rough with sleep. "Anderson, they're moving Atlas before dawn. Ridgemont Annex. Invalid code on file." A beat, then alertness. "You got source?" "Records clerk. Whisper call. Scared." "You recording everything?" "Yes." "Good. Send me location pin and all case IDs now. I'll light up IG and NCIS watch desk if they refuse chain of custody confirmation." Frank looked through the window at his truck idling under sodium lights. "Copy." Reardon lowered his voice. "You go in calm. You let them hang themselves on procedure. Understand me?" Frank thought of Voss's envelope in the dry bag. "Understood." He sent the pin, sent the case, IDs, and was back on the road in under 6 minutes. The last leg ran dark and wet, shoulder lines flashing in and out under intermittent rain. At one county sign, the same surname started appearing in steel and stone before he reached the annex exit. Sutherland Trauma Tower, Sutherland Family Courts Renovation Fund, Sutherland Civic Safety Initiative. Donor lettering gleamed under floodlights like ownership tags. He reached Ridgemont County limits shortly before 2:30 a.m. Frank parked 1 block from the annex and sat in the dark for 16 seconds to steady his hands before they could shake. The annex smelled exactly as Nora's voicemail had sounded. Disinfectant, old steel, anxious dogs. Inside intake, Lena Ortiz looked up from a terminal and saw him in one sweep that told him she had training. Eye line to his face, shoulder line, duffel, hands, then badge. She had a fresh bruise-yellow trace near the old clavicle seam, where her collar sat uneven, and fatigue sat under her eyes like ink. She did not waste words. "Frank Anderson?" "Yes?" "I'm Lena. I flagged Lot 14. Code is fraudulent. They're forcing transfer anyway." He set the binder on her desk and opened to the marked pages. "These are all prior disposition conflicts and handler filings. 2 drives with mirrored logs. Chain of custody starts now." She nodded once and plugged one USB into an isolated terminal. Her fingers moved quick, no panic, just compressed urgency. "Microchip scan in process. Vet already confirmed identity. I can queue handler reclamation and hold transfer if verification lock shifts, but final disposition still needs supervisor sign-off." "Where's Atlas now?" "Kennel Run 12, East Corridor. He's been agitated since midnight." Frank looked through glass into the kennel block and saw shapes moving behind steel. "Who has keys?" "I do. Dr. Keene does. Pike does." She glanced at the clock. 2:49 a.m. "Brady Sutherland is in the building." Frank didn't answer. He only set his left hand flat on the counter until his pulse slowed. 3 minutes later, the lock shifted from red to provisional amber, not release green. Lena printed emergency packet pages and slid them over in a tight stack. "Preload only," she said. "Signatures here and here put your handler claim in active contest and log your physical presence. Final release line stays blank unless I can clear the forged code with dual authorization." He read each line, then signed where she indicated. "If someone challenges, you keep him at heel and don't surrender leash," she said. "Until this clears, he's in contested custody, not transferred inventory, and not formally discharged." They moved down the corridor together, concrete shining under harsh lights. Retired dogs quiet in their runs like they understood the hour. At Kennel 12, Lena keyed the lock and stepped back. Atlas stood before the gate, head high, ears forward, tan and black saddleback coat, dark as iron in shadow. Age had silvered the fur around his muzzle. The left rear leg carried that familiar fractional hitch from cold weather flare-ups. Not weakness, just history written into gait. When the gate opened, Atlas did not bolt. He walked straight to Frank, pressed his forehead to Frank's sternum, and held there, a full-body lean that said recognition, relief, and a warning all at once. Frank dropped to one knee and put both hands into thick fur behind Atlas's ears. "I got you," he said. Atlas exhaled against his chest and made a low sound, almost a hum. Dr. Mira Keene met them at the crossover table, with a med file tucked under her arm. "You're his handler," she said, not asking. "Yes." She handed over the file. "Then you deserve the truth in writing before someone edits it." Frank opened to the service summary page. 8 years old, German Shepherd, 5 deployments, 23 documented lives saved across Afghanistan and Yemen. Not estimated, documented, each entry time-stamped, team signed, mission verified. One line noted detection alert that prevented an IED convoy strike near Kandahar, saving 9 personnel. Another described compound search in Marib province, where Atlas found a pressure plate under loose flooring before entry. Another marked casualty extraction support under fire, Atlas guiding disoriented troops to cover through smoke and concrete dust. He turned the page and found the injury report he already knew by feel. Kandahar. IED search lane. Shrapnel fragment through left hip. Emergency field stabilization. Medivac delayed 43 minutes. Surgical repair successful. Permanent seasonal inflammation expected. Recommendation: reduced high-impact duty, continued handler bond retention for emotional regulation and operational trust. Forgotten hero, filed as inventory. Frank closed the folder and looked at Keene. "Who requested private transfer?" Keene's jaw tightened. "You'll see names soon enough. Right now, you need him out of this corridor." Lena clipped a leash to Atlas's collar and passed it to Frank. "Paperwork is staged, not cleared," she said. "If Pike asks, verification is still pending. If Brady asks, I never saw you." Atlas's ears rotated toward the intake end of the hall before any human heard footsteps. Then he went rigid beside Frank's leg, growl beginning deep in his chest as voices carried around the corner, one of them young and confident and already talking about ownership. Atlas's ears pinned forward and his body locked at Frank's left knee, and the low growl that started in his chest made Lena's skin rise before the men even turned the corner. Brady Sutherland came into the transfer corridor with his phone already in his hand, an entitlement already in his voice, designer jacket open, expensive sunglasses hanging from his collar like it was noon instead of 3 a.m. 2 contractors trailed him and stopped when they saw Frank and Atlas at Run 12, both of them suddenly fascinated by their tablets. Procurement Captain Pike stood 5 yards behind, clipboard tucked tight against his chest, wearing the fixed expression of a man preparing to witness something he planned to deny later. The fluorescent lights flattened everyone into harsh outlines, steel kennel doors throwing back pale reflections, and the whole hallway smelled of bleach, wet fur, and fear. Brady's gaze moved to the leash in Frank's hand and hardened. "Who authorized that release?" Lena stepped in before Frank answered. Her throat was already tight from too little sleep and too much strain, but her voice held. "Transfer is under discrepancy review. Handler claim is active contest. You were notified." Brady laughed, one clipped burst that carried down the corridor. "I don't get notified by intake. I give instruction." He took 3 steps closer, close enough that Atlas shifted his weight without being told. Shoulders squared, head level, eyes fixed on Brady's center line. "Hand me that leash." Frank said nothing. His left hand stayed steady on Atlas's lead. His right hand held the med file Dr. Keene had passed him, thumb resting over the page listing 23 documented lives saved. He had read those lines less than 10 minutes earlier. He could still see Voss's face over them like double exposure. Lena moved half a step to block Brady's path. No. It happened fast and still felt slow. Brady's jaw flexed, and the mask of administrative confidence dropped just enough to show what had always sat under it. A man used to grabbing. His hand shot out, not for the leash, but for Lena's collar, fingers bunching fabric first, then skin. She knocked his wrist away on reflex, old medic drills and older survival instinct firing together. Brady came back harder, palm to her throat, driving her backward into the polished concrete corridor. Her clipboard hit first, then her badge. The sound of plastic and metal on concrete cracked through the kennel block like a starter pistol. 41 people watched and did not move. A logistics lieutenant backed into chain link and stayed there. The bidder in a camel overcoat lifted his phone and adjusted for better light. Dr. Keene froze with one hand over her mouth. Pike looked down at his clipboard as if the lot numbers had suddenly become sacred text. Brady's fingers sank deeper under Lena's jaw. "Clear the transfer," he said through his teeth. "Now." Lena clawed at his wrist and got no leverage. The old clavicle injury lit down her left side when he jerked her higher. Air narrowed to a thread. Her medic mind, trained to stay clinical under fire, started cataloging her own failure points with bitter precision. Compromised airway, decreasing oxygenation, auditory narrowing, tingling in fingers. "Order," she rasped. "Invalid." Brady tightened. Frank did not lunge. That was what changed the room. He watched angles, distance, muscle tension, the phone still in Brady's other hand, the camera dome above Kennel 6, Atlas's line of approach, Lena's knees starting to fold. He had run this kind of geometry in compounds and alleys and stairwells where one wrong inch got someone buried. He felt his pulse flatten into mission rhythm, the way it had in Yemen right before the world sped up. Then Brady kicked Atlas. The designer boot slammed into Atlas's rib line with a hollow crack that bounced off steel and concrete, and Atlas slid one foot before digging in again, growl dropping lower, not panicked, not wild, pure controlled warning. Frank felt the impact in his own chest like memory, translated into force. The same system that had tried to paperwork Atlas into private custody had now put a boot into a decorated MWD in front of 41 witnesses and a live camera dome. Nobody moved. Pike turned a page on his clipboard with shaking fingers. The bidder in the overcoat kept recording. A deputy near the east door looked at the exit sign instead of the chokehold happening 6 feet away. Frank stepped forward once, boots quiet. Lena's vision tunneled. She could see Brady's wristwatch pressed to her throat, engraved initials catching white fluorescent glare. She could hear Atlas's growl like distant thunder moving closer. She forced one hand between Brady's thumb and her airway and made a sliver of space, enough for half a breath that burned. "Codes forged," she whispered. Brady leaned in until his forehead nearly touched hers. "My father funds this annex. My father owns the hospital wing, keeping base command alive." He looked past her at Frank and smiled with borrowed confidence. "You think any of this is yours?" Atlas's ears rotated tighter. His body became stone at Frank's leg. Frank felt old grief push at the edges of his focus and shoved it back where it belonged. Not now, not in this corridor. Voss's last order had been simple. "Dog goes with you." This was the moment that order had been waiting for, stretched across 6 months of vanished forms and delayed responses, and clerks told to keep their heads down. Lena's knees dipped again. Brady hauled her up by her throat like she weighed nothing. Frank closed the final yard and stopped. His gaze stayed on Brady's hand. "Let her go," he said. 3 words, no volume, no strain. Brady blinked once, then lifted his phone higher so the lens framed Frank's face and Atlas at heel. "You just made this criminal," he said, breathing harder now. "My father owns this annex." Frank did not blink. "Let go." Brady's laugh came brittle this time. "You hear me? This building answers to my family." He squeezed Lena again for emphasis, turning the choke into performance for the camera. "Say transfer approved," he hissed at her. "Say it on record." Lena could not answer. Her fingers had gone numb. Atlas rose. He came up to full height without lunging, forelegs straight, chest broad, muzzle inches from Brady's forearm, a low rolling growl building like weather over open ground. His tan and black saddleback coat looked almost black under the corridor lights, and the scarred line of his left hip did not change his balance by a fraction. 41 witnesses heard that sound and understood it as a countdown. Brady finally looked from the phone screen to Frank's eyes and saw something he had never seen in boardrooms, donor dinners, or private clubs. No argument, no negotiation, no need to convince. Just the cold, settled calm of a man who had already calculated every branch and found exactly one outcome. Brady's confidence faltered for the first time, a tiny hitch at the corner of his mouth, but he still tried to reclaim the script. "You touch me, and you're done," he said. "You and your dog are done." Frank moved. His right hand stripped Brady's choking grip with one compact rotation at the thumb line. His left forearm drove between Lena and Brady to clear space. In the same motion, he pivoted, redirected Brady's momentum, and pinned him chest first to reinforce steel. Beside Kennel 4, phone clattering to the floor. The impact sounded like a heavy door slamming. Controlled force. No flourish. Brady's wrist locked at a safe angle that ended resistance without breaking anything. Lena dropped to one knee, coughing hard, pulling air in ragged bursts that scraped her throat raw. Dr. Keene broke from her frozen spot and moved to her side with practiced hands, checking airway, pupils, orientation. "Stay with me," she said. Lena nodded twice, one hand at her neck, eyes wet with oxygen shock and fury. Brady thrashed once against the steel and failed. "Get him off me!" he shouted toward Pike, toward the deputy, toward anyone with a badge and a spine. "Arrest him! Now!" Nobody moved. Frank's voice stayed level by Brady's ear. "Hands visible!" Brady cursed and tried to twist for the dropped phone. Atlas stepped once, placed himself between Brady and the device, and held silent now, eyes bright and unblinking. The message was clear enough that the deputy by the east door finally raised both hands, palms out, and stayed exactly where he was. Lena forced herself upright against the kennel rail. Her voice came back as a scrape. "Intake terminal," she said to Keene. "Logs are live. Don't let them touch it." "I won't," Keene said. Pike found his voice at last, thin and bureaucratic. "Everyone settle down. We can resolve this internally." Frank turned his head just enough to look at him. "You had your chance." From the intake desk, a computer alert chimed twice, sharp in the silence that followed. The intake monitor flashed a red system banner. "External access confirmed. NCIS watch desk mirror complete. IG acknowledgement received. Timestamp locked." Brady went still under Frank's hold. The bidder in the camel overcoat lowered his phone too late, because the camera dome above Kennel 6 was already blinking red, and the corridor microphone had recorded every word about ownership, every threat, every choke, every kick. Lena saw it through watering eyes and felt the first clear line of relief cut through the pain in her throat. Brady heard the alert and finally understood the room had changed shape around him. He stopped fighting. "Call my father," he said. But the command had lost its old weight. No one answered. No one answered, and the silence lasted just long enough for the balance of power to tip where everyone could feel it. Pike's phone started ringing in his pocket, a bright, shrill tone that bounced off steel kennel doors. He looked at the screen, went pale, and turned it face down without accepting the call. The name still flashed once in reflection on his clipboard's plastic cover. Charles Sutherland. The deputy by the east door saw it too. So did Lena, one hand still at her throat, breathing shallow while Dr. Keene kept 2 fingers on her wrist and counted. "Put it on speaker," Lena said, voice scraped raw. Pike didn't move. Frank kept Brady pinned, pressure precise and unhurried. "Do it." Pike fumbled the phone out and answered. Charles Sutherland's voice came through, sharp and controlled. "Captain Pike, why am I hearing there's a delay?" Pike swallowed. "Sir, there's an incident." "There is no incident," Charles said. "Complete the transfer and clear the corridor." Before Pike could answer, another call cut in on his second line. He stared at the screen. Inspector General Regional Desk. His thumb shook above accept. "Take it," Frank said. Pike did, and a woman's voice filled the corridor, clipped and formal. "Captain Ellis Pike, this line is recorded. You are under federal preservation order. Do not alter, delete, or reclassify any disposition records connected to Lot 14, Atlas Microchip serial ending 7214. NCIS Watch Desk has mirrored your active terminal. Confirm compliance." Pike looked at Charles's name, still blinking on hold. He made the smallest sound in his throat, something between panic and surrender. "Confirmed." Charles was still on the other line, now loud enough to bleed through speaker distortion. "Pike, answer me." The deputy at the east door took one step forward, then stopped when Atlas turned his head and fixed him with that old operational stare. Not aggression. Assessment. The deputy raised both hands again and backed to the wall. Dr. Keene guided Lena to a rolling stool, then reached down, picked up Lena's fallen badge, and clipped it back onto her collar with steady hands. "Stay upright," she whispered. "You're still in this." Lena nodded and pointed at intake. "Chain of custody. Start now." By 3:19 a.m., the corridor was no longer local territory. 2 military police units from base command entered first, then NCIS agents in plain jackets with credentials already out, then a federal evidence tech pushing hard cases on a cart. Reardon appeared on a secured tablet call held by one of the agents, gray hair flattened on one side from sleep and anger clear in his eyes. "You did right," he told Frank. Then he looked at Lena. "You too." Brady tried to reassemble his old posture when the cuffs came out. "This is Ridgemont. My father runs half your contracts." The lead NCIS agent, Special Agent Marisol Trent, never looked up from her tablet. "Your father's name appears in 12 procurement communications tied to disputed canine transfers. Keep talking." That was the moment Brady finally stopped sounding confident and started sounding young. Evidence moved hand to hand in plain sight. Frank surrendered his binder, both USB drives, and the sealed dry bag envelope with Voss's handwriting after Trent logged each item and read each label aloud. Lena handed over her encrypted keyring drive, the mirrored screenshots, and the off-site fireproof box key from her wallet. An MP was dispatched with her signed authorization to retrieve the box from apartment 3C while she watched through watery eyes and insisted on the receipt number. Dr. Keene produced her marked print copy of the transfer code and her med clearance file. Trent also logged a protected record submission already routed into NCIS intake under confidential source status. The folded warning note carbon, printer audit, and template revision history with user IDs and timestamps tied to Lot 14. The camel coat bidder, now sweating through his collar, offered his phone recording with a weak, "I didn't edit anything." Trent asked for his device passcode twice. He gave it on the second try. Even Pike's clipboard went into an evidence bag. At 4:02 a.m., the camera dome above Kennel 6 was removed, packaged, and tagged with corridor audio extraction order. At 4:11, the intake terminal was imaged in place. The red external access confirmed banner still glowed in the corner like a verdict. At 4:26, Atlas's microchip was rescanned under dual witness signature, and the number matched Lena's flagged logs exactly. Physical force had ended in seconds. Institutional force took all night. When Charles Sutherland arrived at 4:38 in a wool coat over tailored scrubs, he came in fast and expected doors to open. They didn't. An MP stopped him at the threshold and requested identification like he was anyone else. Charles gave his name like it should have functioned as clearance. Agent Trent met him with a printed hold order. "You may not enter this corridor. You may not contact witnesses. You may retain counsel." Charles scanned the page, eyes hard. "You're making a career mistake." Trent's expression didn't shift. "That sentence is now part of the audio record." At 5:07 a.m., Brady was walked out in cuffs past the donor plaque mounted near the annex entrance. Sutherland Civic Safety Initiative gleamed above his shoulder, while the evidence tech photographed his bruised wrist where Frank had controlled the choke. No one in that hall looked away this time. Not the lieutenant who had backed into chain link. Not the deputy who had studied the exit sign. Not Pike, whose earlier silence became sworn testimony by noon. 3 days later, under oath in a federal conference room that smelled like toner and stale coffee, Pike admitted Charles had called him twice weekly for months about priority canine assets. The lieutenant confirmed hearing Brady say, "My father owns this annex." The deputy admitted he had delayed 2 prior complaints tied to lot transfers, after pressure from the sheriff's office. The master sergeant, who had stared at feeding schedules, never added anything useful. He answered, "I don't recall," 21 times, and that was noted in the final report exactly as it happened. By the second week of November, the Sutherland name was still on buildings, but now also on charging documents. Fraud, coercion, unlawful transfer of government service animals, witness intimidation, and records tampering. Charles was removed from Trauma Tower administration, pending prosecution. Annex contracts were suspended and reassigned to an external military veteran oversight board. The sheriff announced cooperation only after subpoena. Nobody mistook that for courage. The last thing to enter evidence was the sealed envelope Frank had carried for years. At sentencing, the courtroom was cold enough that Lena kept rubbing her hands together between testimony. Mateo sat beside her in a too-big blazer, feet not touching the floor, listening with the fierce attention of a child who already knew institutions could fail and people could still choose right. Atlas waited in the veterans' service room down the hall under court approval, leash clipped to Frank's wrist. When the prosecution called the final exhibit, Agent Trent broke the old seal and unfolded Chief Daniel Voss's letter. The paper crackled once in the microphone. "If I don't make it back, Atlas goes with Frank Anderson. No reassignment outside handler custody. He is not equipment. He is team." The room went still in a different way than the corridor had. Not fear, wait. The letter continued, naming 2 attempted transfer contacts from years earlier and warning that Private buyers already sniff around retired MWD pipelines. Voss had written it before the medevac corridor, before the denials, before Nora's whisper call, before the 900-mile drive. It reframed every misplaced form as deliberate theft. Judge Eleanor Brand read the final line twice before she set the page down. This court accepts the letter as evidence of intent and pattern. She looked at Brady, then at Charles. Family influence is not mitigation. In this record, it is mechanism. Sentencing landed hard in public. Brady went to federal custody. Charles followed on remand after his bail hearing collapsed under documented witness contact attempts. The plaques stayed on walls pending civil review, but now each one pointed investigators to endowments, shell vendors, and transfer requests buried under charitable language. After court, in the service corridor outside Chamber 3, Frank crouched beside Atlas and finally let his forehead rest against the dog's. Atlas pressed in, full weight, head to chest, and did not move until Frank's breathing slowed out of that tight, shallow pattern Lena had seen all morning. Frank's scarred hands disappeared into the thick fur behind Atlas's ears, and for the first time since Ridgemont, his shoulders dropped. 2 weeks later, at a court-approved Veterans Kennel event run by the new Oversight Board, the air smelled like cedar shavings and coffee, and retired handlers stood in small knots, trading deployment stories nobody else in town had wanted to hear. Lena brought Mateo in just after sunrise. He stopped at the gate when he saw Atlas, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't seen since his mother died. Frank gave him space. Atlas sat at heel, ears forward, waiting. Mateo took 3 careful steps and held out his hand the way Lena had taught him, around working dogs. "Atlas," he said, quiet but clear, like he was saying a promise and not a name. Atlas leaned forward, touched his nose to Mateo's palm, then lifted his head and looked back at Frank as if to confirm the new perimeter was safe. Frank nodded once. Mateo smiled for real, the kind that reached his whole face. "He remembers me from the picture." Lena looked from the boy to the dog to Frank, and felt the last locked part of her chest loosen. The forged code, the camera dome, the clipboard silence, the donor walls, the phone calls that used to end things before they started. None of that vanished. It got named, logged, answered. When they left, Mateo walked between Frank and Atlas with one hand on Lena's sleeve and one hand hovering near Atlas's shoulder, not touching, just close, like he understood respect and trust could share the same inch of space. Atlas stayed at Frank's side all the way to the parking lot, tan and black coat turning gold under winter sun.